Austin is saying a few different things to different audiences, but one of the main messages I feel like is you should build here. You feel that energy in the city, and that's amazing. But then the question is, okay, and you should contribute to the culture. We know our personality, we know our character. As we're growing, what are the kind of values and beliefs that we hold on to? And then my feeling is that we express that through all the different verticals of culture, of architecture, art, dance, music. You know, if Austin isn't being thoughtful about the story we're telling to ourselves about ourselves, someone else will tell it, and it will probably be kind of a slightly more generic, soulless version. It's like a sandbox city kind of moment where people want to build together, they want to make something. You can also kind of try something and, oh, it doesn't work. Okay, try something else. And they want to work together to do it.
Austin will go through kind of a rebirth.
Most advanced technology in the world, and if you can't actually build it or ship it, then what's the point?
You need storytellers who are able to paint the picture of what's happening at the frontiers of technology.
The U.S. needs to get back more to that and less like lawyerish and more we're building stuff.
The frontier isn't just a place, it's forged in the fire. Welcome to Austin Next.
Karen,
Jason.
welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much.
And I have to have everybody know, we were talking about this before, this will be the first time I've had a husband and wife on the podcast. So you and Jordan are the first.
So we're number one.
100%. Like,
Number one couple, hands down, is what you're trying to say.
it's exactly what I'm trying to say.
Great.
So
I
I think we'll top
Jordan
it.
will appreciate that also because he likes to be number one.
Yeah, so that's what I said. The goal of this episode is for you to beat his episode.
Exactly. So first goal is if we could just beat everyone as a couple, great. But then if I could beat him, then that's ideal.
That's perfect. There we go.
Love you.
And of course, the funniest part was if you go back to that episode when we were talking about like Austin, Paris in the 20s, Jordan was like, my wife will love you. This is perfect for her. So we'll have to dive into that.
Such nice things about me. He's great and really interesting and smart. Put that in there also.
Oh, no, we'll keep all this in. So, okay.
Perfect.
Now, Jordan, stop listening. Now we're going to. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Now we'll get real.
Okay. I want to start with a little bit of context setting.
Yeah.
Talk to me about, Austin Home, what it does, your obviously role as an editor-in-chief, like, and how it fits into Austin.
Oh.
Besides, small questions.
Yeah. So, yes, I'm the editor-in-chief of Austin Home Magazine. It's a magazine that is 21 years old, which a lot of people don't realize. This like really long-standing publication in Austin. It's super beloved, super kind of respected around town. I would say it means a lot to people. I took over about 2.5 years ago, and I think had a pretty different perspective on it. I think it's safe to say I'm kind of a weird editor.
Okay. What does that mean?
I was never in editorial before I had this position.
Oh, okay.
Editor-in-chief, which is a little strange, but it's kind of a story. But when I got this job, I was running my own business. I was doing creative direction for big real estate projects across the U.S. and was friends with the previous editor-in-chief of Austin Home. And she recommended me when she was stepping out. And it just so happened that the owner of the magazine at the time wanted to experiment by hiring someone from the industry. And I just thought this would be, just kind of a fun, it was a part-time role, quarterly publication. I was almost thinking of it as an additional client in a way. And what has exploded since then was kind of beyond my wildest imagination of what could happen with this publication. And so I'm now full-time with the magazine.
And what role does it have? Like, is it aspirational? Is it people are using it to understand things? Like, how does it fit into kind of the broader ecosystem?
Well, I think actually the way you just worded that kind of hits the nail on the head of what I've been trying to change. I think it has always been super aspirational. and has always been a magazine with beautiful images, beautiful homes, that people would kind of pick up at the grocery store or whatever and kind of flip through and be inspired. I think it's safe to say that most of what was in the publication from its inception to now was, for the most part, out of reach for the majority of the population of Austin. So, very dreamy, aspirational. For me, what I really care about actually is cities. It's not necessarily home. I love homes. I don't want to get fired for saying I don't like homes. I love homes, but what I really care about is cities and the design of cities and how design can make quality of life better or worse for people in cities, and who makes those decisions, and the people that are impacted by those decisions, like how do they find out about that and do they have a voice in it? That's kind of what I really care about. And when it comes to Austin Home, the way I saw the magazine when I took over was more like home means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. And especially in a city like Austin, I think, as opposed to Dallas or Houston, or needless to say, like other cities in other parts of the country, but especially in Texas, the city is very much a part of everyone's everyday life. People are constantly outside. The hospitality industry is so enormous. The public spaces, the parks, the streets, the public and private, everything kind of melds together. And to me, if you're going to have a preeminent design publication of a city, it should really include all of those things too. What are the huge projects that are happening that you should know about, to our readers? What do you have a voice in? What's kind of happening without you being able to have a voice in it? What is a cool multifamily project that's kind of addressing the housing crisis or rising rents in a really cool way? Things like that, and that are more on kind of a civic urban scale, I guess I would say. And
why do you say that Austin is more the city is part of everything more than say like Dallas or Houston? And then I want to, obviously we could talk about something like Chicago or New York as well.
Yeah. I think in Dallas, and I guess I'll speak to Dallas specifically because I'm from there. So I grew up in Dallas. And Dallas is a wonderful city in its own way and in its own right. But it's a very inward-facing social life, I think, for the most part. Like, there are amazing restaurants and hotels. And this is changing a little bit, but especially when I was growing up there, it's like if you want to hang out, you hang out in the backyard, in the house of the people you know. If you see someone, walking around on the street, even in your neighborhood, you're like, what are they up to? What's going on? It's like strange to see. Just to give you a concrete example, Clyde Warren Park was built in Dallas about probably 10 years ago at this point. I might need to be fact checked on that. And it's a big public park in downtown. It's gorgeous. It's really wonderful. Some of the folks involved in Bryant Park in New York were involved in the creation of that park. And it was breaking news that there was a public park in downtown where like people of different backgrounds could like mix and mingle, and you could like meet someone that you wouldn't have met through your work or your church or your whatever. So having kind of a thriving public life, urban life in some of those cities, I think is a little more foreign, except for maybe a district here or a district there. And in Austin, at least my experience of it is so different. Everyone is always outside. Everyone's taking advantage of the public spaces. People are constantly, and now that we have such a vibrant hospitality scene, meaning coffee shops, hotel lobbies, cool bars. Cool bars obviously have been here for a long time, but some of this new layer of this stuff. There are so many people that can just like bump into each other and start a conversation and suddenly exchange information about what they're doing. And all of those different elements of the social aspect, the cultural aspect, even the food, and it really bleeds into the residential aspect of design, I think, in a way that to me seems more pervasive than some of these other cities that are a little more kind of, disconnected between like, okay, here's your private residential life, and okay, maybe you go to a bar with people and then you go back home.
So is it culture driving then the design, or is it design driving the culture? When we think about these open, a lot of times I talk about Austin as having open networks and a culture of helping, and I think about that a lot, obviously in the tech ecosystem. But you kind of described it from this almost more the social scene. It's the same thing. Like you going out, you walk. I mean, for Mother's Day, we went and walked the trail, right? And there was a whole ton of people that were there. Yeah. And it was funny because I saw people taking pictures on X. I'm like, obviously, I must have just passed right by you when you guys were doing this. So it is part of like the fabric of Austin, this kind of more open networks kind of situation.
Oh, yeah. I think to answer your question, I think probably originally the nature, just like the topography, probably, made this kind of environment thrive in the sense that there's so much beauty here and there's so many natural treasures that people were just, probably 100 years ago or whatever.
It's nice to be outside.
Drawn out of their homes and into interacting with people, with other people that they don't know. But I also think that from, the very origins of what we think of as Austin now, which is maybe 50 years ago, 60 years ago, people were coming here because they didn't feel like those other kinds of places resonated with them. If I don't fit in perfectly into this kind of a social scene or whatever, then I don't belong. And in Austin, it was the opposite, right? It was like actually the alternative people are the people that weren't exactly inside the box. Like this is where they all came to and felt so at home.
Austin has always been the counterculture kind of capital. And I think what just changed is what is countercultural.
Oh, yeah.
I'd push back or pull it back farther because you just think about just the origin of Texas and it's been that it probably goes back more than 50 years, right?
If you think about the origin of Texas, it's very true. Yes. And we are the capital.
So I think that kind of fits. But then the outdoors, I've not gotten a chance to explore Denver. I don't know if you've had. It feels like that same outdoor nature, just having that ability to go to nice places. I think I usually put it like the number one like outdoorsy place in the country. Does drive a different kind of social scene than when you're kind of in these weather related. But then I'd ask like for something like New York and Chicago, which obviously the weather is not as nice. Here when it's the summer, it's also not that nice.
It's true. But then we have the water and we could just
yes.
And then you meet people there.
But so when you think about like those kind of cities, obviously the sharp elbows is something that you hear, but what do you think about that kind of connectivity and the people kind of around? Is it the same as you with Dallas? Is it very different? And obviously the context, I know you lived in New York for a long time.
Yeah, I was in New York for 13 years. I think thinking about New York versus Austin, I think is really, really interesting. And part of what led me and Jordan to want to live here is definitely the contrast in many ways. So that was very intentional. But New York has, in contrast to Austin, I think most places in Texas, it has a really deep cultural history that's kind of inherited. And just history as a city in general, and an intellectual history, a social history, a cultural history. It has this like unbelievable richness that now in many ways has kind of cannibalized itself, I think, in a way, in that there's so many people that can't participate in it anymore, that it's becoming a little more and more generic and harder to do, more interesting kind of out of the box things. Unless you have a gazillion dollars, then maybe you can, build a little island outside of.
I've been on that island. That is a really cool island.
It's very cool. But
yes.
It took a lot of money. I couldn't do that. So some people can do really interesting things in Manhattan, but I think it's, because it's just kind of a gift and a curse. It has this unbelievable legacy of history and things that people have built and maybe these networks that we're talking about, but it's gotten to such a point that it's almost tipping over in the other direction where there are a lot of closed doors and there's a lot of things that are closed off to a lot of people, which inherently makes it a less interesting city. I think.
Since you bring up I forget the name of what's the name of the park?
In Dallas?
No, in New York.
Bryant Park.
The island. Sorry.
Oh, I think it's called Little Island Park.
Little Island
if I'm
Park,
not
yeah.
mistaken.
When we were last in New York, yeah, we went and visited that.
Yeah.
It was really cool.
It was very cool.
But the question that is, since that's the thing you pointed out, can you just not do small things anymore? Like this small experience, like, are they just, is it too loud? Sure, you can do a small thing and no one will ever know.
I think it's probably a combination of both. So when I was in New York, I was the co-founder of this project called The Tanks in Williamsburg in Brooklyn. And it was me and two other friends, and there were these oil tanks on the waterfront in Brooklyn, and they were going to be kind of torn down in order to build a park. But we kept reading it was years and years and years that this park was promised to this neighborhood and it was never built. And so we kind of decided, one of the three friends lived there, and that's how we discovered this place. And we kind of decided, what if we put together like a really cool vision, really amazing, something really exciting here. And then maybe this park will finally be built to these people that it was promised to. And long story short, what we were proposing was to clean out the oil tanks and remediate them in place and create kind of an oil tank park, which is something that is happening all over the world. This is
Really?
a whole podcast unto itself. But, there's this ubiquitous global infrastructure of oil tanks, and many of them are on waterfronts all around the world, and Tel Aviv and all these places you see, and many of them are not in use anymore. So we thought maybe we could kind of help solve this problem here, and it could be a typology that's used all around the world. And it actually was super inspiring. We got a lot of people behind it, a lot of signatures, and, big movement. And then overnight, just actually because of the traction that we were gaining and for kind of political reasons, the mayor had them demolished like overnight one day. And it was so sad. And it really was one of those, we were working on it for like 4 or 5 years and people were so psyched about it. Obviously there were some mixed opinions, but it was just one of those feelings of like, okay, it's really hard to do cool things here unless you're already a person who kind of has some
You can call the mayor and say, don't do this.
Mayor?
Right. We've got an idea. Please don't tear it down.
As opposed to, just to give you such a contrast, smaller scale, of course, and lower stakes. But for every issue we have an issue release party for Austin Home Magazine. And for our last fall issue release party, we wanted to have it on what is now called Old Six, previously Dirty Six, still Dirty Six. Old Six, where they're kind of doing that whole block. And I think they're actually doing incredible work of historic preservation and some adaptive reuse. And we wanted to do a block party. And we wanted to just like close off a part of the street and have a block party. And we asked, and the city was like, oh yeah, that sounds great. So we closed off. So we just had a block party, and it was so amazing. And so many people learned about this project that's going to be impacting their city. And, they got some behind the scenes tours of some of the buildings by Clayton Cordy, who's the architect of the project. And I just thought, that's so different.
How do you, something like Old Six, Dirty, whatever you want to call it, Sixth Street.
Sixth Street,
yeah.
Yes.
I mean, in your mind, how do you balance historic preservation, one, so it's not a weapon, because it's clearly being weaponized, and then also allow for change, right? Like sometimes it's hard to be like, well, if something's been there for 100 years, it now hits a certain threshold versus, oh, it's 20 years old and it's important. I mean, I see the same thing when people are complaining about very old, institutions going away. There was recently like the candy shop here, which was really funny because I'd never heard of it. We were getting the kids, this was like last year, passports, and we finally got it done at like the Travis County, thing. And like, oh, as a reward, we're going to go to this candy shop across the way. And then realized it was like, Sarah had heard of it. It was like a famous one.
Yeah.
There was nobody in it. Yeah. It's like a Saturday. And it was like, I have, like, it's not, I've said this on a number of things, so I'm sure I'm going to get in trouble. Like, I want these institutions to do well. I want them to grow. When they fail, and for a situation like, okay, you've got no one in, like, I see why it's not the times. Like, you haven't adapted in some way to the times and to be able to kind of grow. And it's not like, oh, I need 6 more stores. It's like, well, how do you grow 2% every year? to actually be able to drive if property taxes go up or if anything goes up?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think it's so, this is an unsatisfying answer, but it's so on a case by case basis that I think I'm the biggest advocate for historic preservation. Really, really big advocate. Obviously, when there's a business and the business doesn't make sense, as a business model, I think that's obviously something you need to look at because you can't, it's hard to just subsidize something. Then it's just a museum or a relic, which maybe is worthwhile actually, but you have to think about it a little
Then call it
differently.
that. Yeah, what it is, right?
Oh, no, I'm going to get in trouble.
No, if we are preserving, I mean, there are plenty of like famous author houses and things like that. We're preserving this because it was
It's meaningful and significant.
and just then be forthright, like we're doing this. This is why we're preserving it, instead of the kind of like we just want to still exist and this kind of thing.
Well, what you're hitting on is something that's very, very important to me because I think a lot of what I'm trying to do in Austin Home is, I used to work for a developer in New York. And so I kind of understand that mentality. And I think just in the context of like, what do we keep? What do we demolish? How do we build forward while still preserving what's important, but also build towards the future? And my feeling is, in my dream, if a developer comes into town from out of town and they're building something here, and they say, oh, here's Austin's design magazine. Let me pick this up and see what these people care about. I want them to see what Austinites care about. Like, we've had a historic preservation issue, things about sustainability and affordability and all of those things. I think that, and this is something I think about a lot, is that Austin has such a clear personality. I think as a city.
Okay. Define it then.
I think Austin has this legacy of a sort of counterculture, as you said, almost in the best way possible, like Dazed and Confused kind of vibe of, laid back, community focused, social, like focused on each other, but just kind of, like the weird, the counterculture, the alternative, like not having to swim with the current, no pun intended. And so I think that, that's what people love about Austin. I think that's kind of the aura that still glows around Austin. I think what is not totally established yet and what is drawing so many people to come here, hopefully, and what needs to be established, in my opinion, pretty quickly, is the culture. In other words, what are our values?
Rather than defined against the current, what is the actual like?
Right. It's like we know our personality, we know our character, we know like we all love that. Nobody wants to change that, obviously. But now the question is, as we're growing, what are the kind of values and beliefs that we hold on to? And then my feeling is that we express that through all the different verticals of culture, of architecture, art, dance, music, certain types of music, art. And those are the different things that are starting to flourish in different ways in Austin right now. I know one guy who's kind of leading the underground fashion scene here in Austin in this very cool way, and one person who's kind of trying really hard to elevate high art in Austin, which hasn't historically been the most prominent thing. So it's just interesting to me because, like, if you think the contrast with New York has a very established personality, very established values and beliefs. We were talking about the Graham essay that you sent about cities and ambition, and New York is, you need to make money. There are some other offshoots of that, I'd argue, too. So in Austin, I was thinking a lot about what you sent, because the question is like, well, what does this city say to people? What do you think it says?
I think.
By the way, I tend to do this and like flip the interview.
No, it's fine. These are
the
point is these are conversations, not interviews. So one aspect I think there are only two constants in Austin: change and people bitching about change.
That's
because
very
like
true.
when we first moved here, somehow on X, Twitter, whatever people want to call, I got yelled at for calling it X on a recent episode. People who've been on it for longer. Yeah. Okay. Whatever. I only got on it after in the last few years. So somehow I came across like a Statesman article from like the 80s that was like, everyone's moving here and traffic sucks.
Oh, yeah.
And then it was like, I think it was ATX Today or somebody did, this was like maybe a year or two ago, they found like an 1890s article that essentially was the same thing. And so
from the very founding of Austin,
yes,
there was like a lawyer versus this guy. One was saying, oh, it's changing too much. It's not changing enough. So,
yeah,
this
it was cool
happening
5 years ago when I got here and you all are, you know. But I think what's one of the tensions that happens because I think that when you have something that counterculture is so embedded into the DNA, and of course, when that counterculture by its nature shifts, people are like, well, I was counterculture. Like, you're not anymore.
Right.
Like,
now that's the basic thing.
Right. Like the whole, I mean, like keep Austin weird. I think like the origin of it was, I think some outside, I think it was like Barnes and Noble, some bookstore stuff. And it was, so keep Austin weird's initial,
oh boy.
Someone will have to check me on what the store was, what it started, but it really was keep Austin local. It was about local businesses. And now, of course, I think it's been completely weaponized.
Oh my God.
Especially with like, you know, when it's like, oh, it's the tech bros and these things. I'm like, you came here before and like you know, like it's everybody kind of changes these things, but then the weight changes and all that kind of stuff and how it goes. And so I think that that's we're at one of those more inflection point moments that I think that, and I can't go back to the last one, but like the it's when people go back and talk about Dazed and Confused. Like, it's great, and that's part of like the history, but the slacker culture is only since what, the 90s?
Right.
You know, like that wasn't the culture before that became part of it.
I couldn't agree with you more. And so I think that it is an inflection point, and it's kind of a moment of solidifying, okay, what matters to us and how do we kind of ground ourselves in that moving forward? Like, I think, you know, in that, I really keep thinking about this essay, how it says different cities say you should have money, or you should have power, or you should I think Austin is saying a few different things to different audiences, but one of the main messages I feel like is you should build here. And that's why a lot of people come. In my world, it's developers, it's, you know, but building in every sense of the word. It could be huge businesses, it could be buildings, but it's also everybody you meet. You know, everyone has a Substack or this or a run club or something that they're trying to create. So I love that because I think you feel that energy in the city, and that's amazing. But then the question is, okay, and you should contribute to the culture in some way. Like, how is this pushing us in the direction we want to go? So in my language, in my world, it's like, yes, you can build a large glass tower, and that's contributing economically. And that's great. And I guess you could say that contributes to the culture kind of in a waterfall way. But my question would be, okay, what are we doing with the ground floor? Is it just like a sheet of glass, or there kind of a dimensionality and a place for a handmade quality or some differentiation that makes people feel safe? And what are we doing to make it feel safe? And what, you know, a lot of these questions that, like, when I see just a sheet of glass on the ground floor, I just know, okay, they didn't answer that second question.
My friend Ryan runs a Substack called The City of Yes.
Yeah.
And there was an article that he's completely incepted into my brain out of this about, he was in, I think in Portugal, he was in Lisbon, talking about lingering. And like how all these amazing things to linger. And I think that's one of the biggest issues that we have, especially in downtown, is like, I will go to X, I will go to Y, I will go to these different things to go to these places. But like, and we'll put the homeless, like, yes, there's that issue as well. Like that, you know, but also there's like, I'm not going to just walk down the street for different things because there's nothing to linger at. I'm like, oh, I want to go linger in this store, whether it be you get the coffee shop or the art or whatever it is. Just like, I'm not going to go walk around and discover new things. I'm just going to go for X, and then I'm going to get in the car and leave.
Well, I think that's a great point, because if you think, and you know, again, I just, to hammer everything is a nail. So I just keep thinking about this in terms of like the lens of these developers, landlords, you know, landowners, is the people who are owning and managing these properties downtown. And some of them are doing this, many of them are not. It's like, okay, you know, how can I build? Okay, yes, they're building. But then how can I contribute to the culture? It's like if they were answering that question, then they would say, well, let me think about my public space here and what's happening right outside. Like, what should the seating situation be? Should we have cameras so people feel safe? Should we have plants? Or how am I designing my storefront? Who should I put in here? Like, should it be a Starbucks or an independent bookstore? Or, luckily, there are more and more developers, I think, that are kind of subsidizing retail as an amenity for the people upstairs, which is great, because also a whole other podcast, but a lot of developers choose the Starbucks or the Target or whatever because they have amazing credit and they know they're going to pay their bills.
We got into this whole
But
issue.
then they don't let you linger when you walk downtown.
Right. You go and we got into actually this exact same issue with on the startup side. This was like, I think in one of my, whatever order this will come out, but like in a recent episode where we talked about the lack of flexibility for startups in like the 3,000, 5,000, 10, 8,000 square feet.
Yeah.
Because it's like, well, we either have something really tiny, but probably not go to the co-working space, or we want the giant anchor because you're going to, the same reason you said, like, I'd rather do like a large, I'd rather do the Google and Starbucks than the independent and the, and the startup. And
Totally.
it's a completely rational set of decisions that they are making, except for that it lacks the second order thinking, right? Because like if you are the developer who's putting in these 10, startups and one of them becomes they might call you to build the big one that's coming afterwards.
Totally. And it also doesn't really answer that other question, like how are you contributing to the culture? 'Cause you're not, I guess in some ways, you could, but there's that part that is being totally left out. I feel the same way about retail as you feel about those.
Well, but I think
tenants.
but your point on and it is intentional because you're right. This Starbucks is fine. I like it. I drink there too, right? I tend to jokingly, I live like a better half. Because it happens to be like where, I go a lot, right?
Well, how many times have we run into each
Yeah,
other?
exactly.
there?
Yes.
Probably, yeah.
The amount of like free, I think, advertising they've gotten on the podcast to this.
Just a better half.
Yeah, they're very nice to me too. Actually, I have this is the difference between like these larger frames and not. I was ordering like eggs there, and I usually get eggs there a lot. And I was like, oh, I want it over easy. They're like, are you sure? I'm like, oh no, you're right, over medium. So
Wow.
so yeah, so like they're catching my own like orders.
Friendly neighborhood.
Yes.
Coffee shop.
And so, but to your point that you have that kind of loyalty. The chains became large chains for a reason. So again, like I'm not saying like no, we shouldn't have Starbucks anywhere or anything like that.
Course,
But taking those risks on, let me try this one or that one, and you know what? A lot of times it doesn't work. And I understand that, and there's risk, like in the world that we're all in, like that's part of the game.
Yeah.
But I think there is interesting opportunities that continue to happen here, and if you take a little more risk on that, who knows what ends up happening? You end up having like the new coffee shop that everybody goes to, and then of course that has the second order effects on your building. I want to be in the building because this one that's not Starbucks.
100%. One of my dear friends in the city is Ingrid Spencer. She's the executive director of AIA Austin, which is the American Institute of Architects Austin chapter. She's incredible. She's really like an incredible leader of design in Austin. And she said that I was just talking to her about this because I'm a nerd and this is just what I talk about. And
We're all nerds is what we found out on the things we love. So yeah.
Okay, thank God. She said she wishes that there was a public space czar of Austin, like a position in public office of someone who was thinking holistically and strategically about the public spaces of Austin. So in other words, thinking about retail on the ground floors, thinking about the streets, the public spaces, districts. Do we have a design district? Do we have a this district? Do we have a that district? And just think so that you're not walking down this kind of anonymous street where this developer decided to do this, that developer decided to do that. It doesn't really go,
But doesn't that then impose that person's taste on the city rather than having the organic nature that happens when you have a little bit more of this kind of, you're right, it's this, and this, and that's very weird, but that street is Austin, as you end up seeing that.
Oh, well, I guess my vision when she said that would be that it's a person who would implement that, who would actually like pave the way, no pun intended, for the indie, the small, the experimental, like that would actually require developers to have, okay, 10% of your space has to be devoted to that, as opposed to just kind of letting things be at the behest of each individual developer. I'm thinking now very much of downtown, where
Well, even in downtown, like there was an article by Richard Florida talking about Tokyo and the neighborhoods there,
Yeah.
and how not only, I think it was, my Japanese is going to suck, so I'm not going to try the names of them again. But I remember like it was a great piece that they ended up having flavor, but as far as I could tell from it, they weren't imposed, and they actually had changed over time. So you had the more, tech one, you had the more fashion one, you had the more, but then, so like, oh, I want to go be my company in there because it kind of fits, rather than, I don't like the innovation district type things where you're like, we are doing in this realm, versus, now sometimes having from the top down.
For sure.
From organic, because you look at like, I do think we're at this point where we do need those kinds of neighborhoods. Now, obviously, I've got the tech lens on, but I think you have that in all those kind of, you can have in the cultural lens, et cetera. Some happen organically, like, East and Southeast Austin, that's become the industrial corridor, right? From like Icon to Saronic to Aloe to, Base, like it's all happening naturally, partially because like we need large spaces in warehouses. Okay, that's where you can do it.
we want to be around other people with
Right.
large spaces and warehouses. So let's all,
Yeah, the agglomeration effects is necessary in all of these things, especially since I may have told you the story before, but so when Danny Crichton from Lux Capital was on, and he told this really great story about like why are art or paint shops in New York open till 4 a.m. and it's because artists keep weird hours and run out of green paint at 2 a.m. So there's that perfect synergy of the neighborhood that's like, we know what you need, we're providing that. And so like that that you only get when like you have the agglomeration effect of everybody in these kind of tight areas.
Yeah. That is a really great point. I think it's a fine line. So let's use a concrete example. One thing that's very top of my mind right now is the idea of a design district in Austin. Because Austin, when I look at the talent and the legacy here of the school and the architects that have been here, and now more recently the interior design community that's here, it's an unequivocal design capital of the country. It's incredible.
Really?
Oh my God, it's incredible the talent that's here.
Is that narrative getting out?
Well, it's starting to. It's definitely starting to. It's definitely a big goal of Austin Home for me, a big goal of mine for Austin Home, to platform Austin for the design capital that it is. And we could talk about that. We're trying to do that in a lot of different ways. But one of those things, if you look at the other design capitals around the world, they have two things. They have a design week.
When I think of design capitals, the places that come to mind are more on fashion, but I would think Paris and New York. Is that correct? Also in design, or is that wrong?
Not necessarily Paris.
Okay.
They probably have a design week too, but New York for sure. But there's also, there's some Scandinavian places. There's Milan. Milan has an incredible kind of furniture-centric, specifically industry. So not necessarily equivalent to fashion. There are some places that
it's not the same. Okay.
As design-centric. Palm Springs, places like that. So what do they have? They have a design week and a design district. They all do. And some of them, the design districts are more planned, and those are a little more lame. Mm-hmm. And others are very organic. But one thing, when I think about Austin, like a lot of the people that are here go to other cities. They go to Dallas, they go to New York and things like that to kind of specify materials and those kinds of things. And I think a big reason for that is there are such amazing resources here. There are amazing showrooms. There are amazing people doing amazing things.
And they're just all over the place.
All over the place. A lot of them don't talk to each other. A lot of them do. But I have been shocked, because I'm like a professional schmoozer. I just love meeting everyone, basically doing this without the microphones, like having coffee. And, I'll be talking to someone and I'm like, oh, surely for example, Ingrid. And they're like, oh, no, we haven't met. And meanwhile, this person is doing an incredible thing here. And they just don't. Now they're starting to all know each other more and more. But I have been thinking a lot of, 6th Street, for example, where MML and Herzog de Meuron, they're doing this incredible development of 6th and Blanco. And
it's West 6th. Yeah. Okay.
West 6th.
Yeah.
There's that. There's this amazing kind of corner of East Austin with some of the most amazing firms, Fern Santini, Mark Cravata, Ten Eyck. They're all Omet. They're all around each other and maybe even in some of the same buildings, but they kind of passively know each other. And I was just talking to someone who just moved in there and he said, I wish there was like a great design or centric coffee shop here. So I guess my point is that for sure these things have to be organic, because the places where, like in Miami, for example, I hate the design district. It's called the design district. I love Miami, but it's very top down. They said, this is where the design district will be. And then they brought retailers that the clothes are totally out of reach for most people, and it's just for a very specific audience. On the other hand, if there's an area in a neighborhood that's already kind of bubbling up, and it just takes someone looking at that and saying, we're going to designate this as a design district, and it maybe even gets special tax credits for people who come there, and maybe encourages a coffee shop to open up because it's the new design district or whatever, then that to me is an amazing economic engine.
It's more narratively driven than policy driven. Some of these that don't, you have to we're talking about like the industrial corridor, we're going around an X, we need a name, we need something to it's there, it's happening, with St. Elmo's is kind of the starting point, but having that, I hate Silicon Hills, just passionately as a name. Because I think any of the
I've never heard that before.
You haven't heard that one? No, all the Silicon Slopes, Hill, all of them, all the derivative ones are awful, right?
Yeah.
Versus you want to be, be the first Austin, the first New York, the first, not the next anything, right? Sure. So, but having that kind of, I think, narrative, sometimes you said it's somebody looking and saying, look, wow, all this stuff already exists. Sometimes it requires somebody just to plant the flag and saying, we're kind of pulling this all in.
Totally. I actually think Austin, as I'm hearing you describe that, I feel like Austin Home, in our small, humble way, has done that a little bit, in the sense that, our issue release parties that we've had and our Home and Design Awards, one night a year, we celebrate everyone for their amazing work. We didn't do anything, policy driven or anything top down whatsoever. It was more about saying this unbelievable ocean of talent already exists here. Or should we say lake of talent? Because we're in Austin. I'm so sorry. I'll stop. Okay. We have this incredible pool of talent, whatever body of water of talent.
Lots of talent.
Lots of talent. And it's already here. They're already doing amazing work. It's a little disparate. Who's telling the story of that? Where do they all hang out?
So,
where do they all meet up and exchange ideas? And we just kind of provided a little more of a platform for that. And it's everyone showed up. It's insane.
100%. I think there are 3 general issues in Austin.
Okay.
One is, and you've hit it, and I've seen it at the bio level, but it's a lot more fragmented than one would have expected.
Totally.
But the funny thing is, we are fragmented at the same time that the networks are very small.
Yes.
That you realize, we knew 90 people in common kind of thing, even though we've never met, or maybe that second level kind of thing. So it's very small, but very fragmented. So a lot of the times it ends up happening, whether it be in design or you're I'm just working, I'm doing my thing. I wouldn't call this design capital because I don't know anybody else working on this kind of thing, right?
Yes.
The second thing then is infrastructure, and that's the broadest thing of just we are doing great, but we just need more of everything. We need more capital, more talent, more physical infrastructure, just more. I've said this on the podcast a lot of times. Austin punches above its weight. Okay, at this point, the weight's got to catch up. Like, imagine what we could do if not everyone's like, if I had 10x, if there were more 10 times as many VCs that were here, there are more designers, whatever it ends up being, right?
Yeah.
The last, which I think Austin does well at the highest macro level now, but as soon as we go down a level, it's a little more problematic, and that's narrative. So the Austin narrative, I think, is doing very well as you think about like, it's this, I mean, when you look about when all of us and the heavyweights all kind of moved here, they moved to Austin for Austin, right? It wasn't for X, Y, or Z. They moved for these kinds of things.
Yeah.
As soon as you go down a layer below that, the narrative gets a little bit more muddy. You're like, oh, well, am I coming? Is this particular thing great in Austin? Is that particular thing? Or here's the first principles of it. And I think that's where the storyteller element, and I break storytellers into two different modes, but the storyteller element is lacking in some. I think there's a lot of things that are happening now. A lot of post 2020, some amazing groups, amazing people have kind of started doing this kind of thing, but it hasn't been at that level, right? And then you had like the more traditional media has sometimes been anti what's happening, so that doesn't help either.
Yeah.
But so I think you need those. And the way I break the storytellers into, so I have this kind of what ecosystems thrive. You have the three pieces to it, right? So you have builders, which is the founders, funders, operators, the kind of the classic thing that everybody thinks of. Obviously, I've got a bit of an innovation ecosystem thinking here.
Yeah.
You've got the philosophers, which are the ones here, anybody who's expanding our mind of the universe, right? So that can be anything from pure scientists to actual philosophers to just extending how we think. And then storytellers, which are both the chroniclers, the people who are saying like, this is what's going on. Let me get the message out of what's happening. And it is the creatives who are inspiring the builders and so forth. So when you have that kind of close, that close relationship, you're like, that's amazing. I mean, we talk about in technology, we have flip phones because somebody saw Star Trek and said, I want to make that happen.
Yeah.
Famously, like I think both like Palmer and Elon are trying to make the things that into existence that their 13-year-old selves wanted to have in existence. I want spaceships to exist. I want these VR to exist. So I'm just going to make it exist. And so you have, both the traditional artists, the filmmakers, the writers that are inspiring this kind of inspiration innovation loop.
Yeah. That's very true. I think what I've noticed in terms of that storytelling here in Austin is that until recently, there's been almost like a reluctance around it, at least in my world.
I've yelled at some people in some group chats, you know who you are. We're like, no, we should just build. We don't have to tell our story.
Right. So that was one of the first things I noticed when I took over this magazine is that I noticed a lot of the same people were being published over and over again. And they were great. They're talented, super talented. But I was like...
They're the only ones talking.
They were the ones that hired the PR company that was like sending the press releases in the inbox. And that's what was being used, basically. And again, very talented, just to be clear, super talented and very deserving of publication. But I just thought, okay, well, where's everyone else? We also have a school of architecture here, and we have all this other stuff going on. And again, my background was not in editorial, so I knew even myself some architect friends here and things like that. And I was like, well, why aren't they? Anyway, the more and more I dove into it, I just realized, they're not interested in that. Or there's this like reluctance there of the most successful architects, like icons, or people, like legendary, iconic firms that have been doing a lot of work that are super successful, even nascent firms that are doing well. There's almost this like aversion to putting yourself out there and telling the story, which, by the way, is a really big problem of the architecture industry in general. It used to be in the AIA guideline, American Institute of Architects guidelines, that you shouldn't market yourself, and that was changed.
What?
A few decades ago, but like in the origins, that was one of the values, because architects just said, we're just going to build, we're going to do our jobs, and we're going to do an amazing job, and then it can be word of mouth. And so
it's not how it works.
In that industry in general, there's almost this feeling of like, if your work is good enough, you shouldn't have to proactively put yourself out there.
Okay, so you'll know better than I. I can name maybe 3 or 4 architects like ever. Like, but the point is like Frank
We
Lloyd.
should hang out more.
Well, but like Frank Lloyd Wright, like I'm assuming the work didn't stand for itself. I'm guessing that he spoke and told the story. I may be wrong in this, but my guess is the few that I can name were because they were not only were they amazing architects, but they went out and told their story.
That's a great question. I actually like thinking about Frank Lloyd Wright specifically. He did do such enormous work and such impactful work that I wonder how much was proactive versus he was just so different that, you know, that's a great question. I don't know. I'd want to.
We'll have to go look it up afterwards. Yeah, I mean, obviously you have social media and these things, but like you would think that, especially it's maybe different today, but especially in I don't remember exactly what his time era was, but like you know. Unless you went to the house, like you had to use the magazines, you had to use these types of things to be able to. So if you weren't telling the story out there, like there was no method, I think, for people to find out about this, right?
I guess it was just the maybe university system, I guess. That would just.
How would the university system tell the story of
like pre-social media or
Yeah.
whatever? It's just, you know, visiting professors and visiting architects at different universities, giving lectures and things like that. And maybe spreading the word in that way, but it's definitely something that is, to be clear, no longer in the guidelines.
Okay.
But you can feel it. It's still like deeply embedded somehow in the ethos of the design, the architectural world. Interiors maybe is a little different, but the architectural world of like my work should just speak for itself.
Is there some? I don't like postmodern. I don't like the brutal. I don't like the boxy. You know, I want us to get back to like make it interesting. Make it, you know, whether it's the neo art deco or whatever it is, like that. I just wanted it to be interesting.
Yeah.
Does those pieces go together? Like it almost became let the work speak for itself. It became so economical, you know, that they're one of the things that like, you know, sometimes you don't realize the second order effects of beauty. Like, oh, well, back to your point, like if you have the cool coffee shop below or you have the interesting thing, you're going to linger and it's going to drive economic value.
That's you're asking me some very interesting questions about the historical trajectory of the architecture profession. I'm actually like wondering about these things. But, you know, certainly now there are those elements like we're talking about where actually the work does speak for itself in a way because it improves the quality of life so much that people talk about it and experience it. But I think it's a fine line to walk in this storytelling that we're talking about because on the one hand, if you don't tell any story about yourself, or, you know, if Austin isn't being thoughtful about the story we're telling to ourselves about ourselves, someone else will tell it, and it will probably be kind of a slightly more generic, soulless version, or like one-dimensional version of what's actually happening here. So, you know, we have to, I think the importance of telling the story is that it can be very like thoughtful and intentional and well, what do we really care about? You know, for example, I just kind of keep coming back to the process of the magazine is that when I first started, what I did was I had probably 70, without exaggeration, like coffees with architects, interior designers around town. And I just asked them, like, what do you care about? What would you want to read about? What do you think is amazing about Austin and the design scene? What do we need, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that is what has allowed us to tell that narrative in a very genuine way, as opposed to say, you know, we could easily have done a magazine that's like, oh, Austin is weird. Look at this kooky bar. Look at, you know, but Austin is so much more than that. And it's so much more nuanced. And it's leading the way in design in many ways, you know, at the same league of cities across the country, like New York and Chicago. There's a lot that we're offering as a city. And so I think on the one hand, I understand not wanting to be too flashy and marketing-y about it, but you also have to get that out there because otherwise it will either disappear or someone else will write it for you.
So there was a Wall Street Journal article last year that was like, tech is over in Austin. I spent 2 days yelling at them.
I was like, oh, that's so interesting that's your take on it.
Well, and the funniest thing is to your point, ends up being narratively defined by others. Clearly, the headline was written first because it was based off of one data set from Signal Fire, which I laughed because they didn't show. They talked about the chart, they didn't show it. it was there's a reason, because it was about like negative tech job growth, both in startups and in large companies. And if you see the chart, first, the headline of the chart is Miami and San Diego are only cities that buck trend. It was the head on the chart. And Austin's negative growth was right in the middle. Like we'd lost as much as Boston, like, I think it was like Toronto or Calgary. It was a Canadian city that was like off the chart. And so you're like, okay, so when you see the data,
they would upset you.
Right. Well,
People
yeah.
like you. This is a better headline.
And then the second piece was, it was two anecdotal stories. One from like a person who'd been in like 5 cities in 3 years. And like, I can't make, Austin didn't make it. Like, I don't think you can make it anywhere. And then some like outsourced developer who was like, there wasn't any clients here. It's like, again, that feels like a you problem. But so, so you have to kind of define that. And I think that, and I think that's one of the things with this, that where storytellers is not the same thing as storytelling as a skill. But you're right. Like the single architect should be telling their story and being able to market and get their name out there. But it's not the same as being the storyteller. Actually, they're very separate roles, right?
I think that's right. And I think where they converge is in this next chapter of Austin, right? Because there's an element of storytelling, which is like what I've been trying to do in some ways the past 2 years of, there's already so much here, let's just bring it to the forefront. And then there's a second half of it, which is, well, what is our future? Not even just storytelling, like what is our story going to be? What is the future here? And to me, the way that comes to life is, for sure, obviously, I think, in design and architecture, but also in all of these other verticals of whatever, your little corner of the magical world may be, whether it's art, the visual arts, sculpture, poetry, writing, music, fashion, all of these things that I think in a new way for Austin are starting to kind of bubble up in a very interesting way.
We've had a lot of this historically, and I think it's growing. And I think one of the issues is, and your thought on how to do this is, you have the kind of the mainstream tech, like this part of Austin, and you have this kind of the Paris in the 20s, type of version of Austin.
Yeah.
But they're literally like this. They're very separate and not as convergent as I think they could be, and what would have a very interesting then flywheel effect if they are.
Well, we're starting to bridge the gap today.
There you go.
Sitting here together. I totally agree with you. I have a very good friend who is really leading the way. His name is Nick Campbell, of the high arts in Austin, the visual arts. Because historically, obviously, Dallas and Houston have been much bigger patrons of that caliber and category of art than Austin. He's leading the way in that. And I think he is seeing that in that he says, there are a lot of new people here. And there are also a lot of people who potentially could invest in these cultural elements of Austin. But they're totally disconnected. Like, we don't know each other. Like, he's starting to know them for sure. But his people, like, they don't really know them. They don't know the artists. There is this big disconnect.
Is the lack of patronage, or I think it's the word, in Austin more a nature of Austin's always been? Is it a more recent thing? Like you hear a lot about like Dallas are putting this money in, and obviously New York has a long history of this kind of thing, or just going back to like the Medicis in Florence, right?
Yeah.
But I hear a lot now. They complain like, oh, so and so is not doing. Like, of course, complaining is never going to get somebody to do something, right? But
the opposite.
Right. So is it? Do you think it's something more about Austin, or is it something that it is back to our points of that we've got these like fragmented worlds that aren't interconnecting? It's like, well, of course they're not. They don't know you at all, so why would they ever write a check?
I think it's totally both. I think for sure we should all just know each other more.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe you and I can work on that somehow. But it's also like the people that come to Austin, as opposed to Dallas or Houston or wherever, they're not coming here looking for that. Like, they're not coming here looking for opera.
Are they coming here to build?
They're either coming to build or they're coming for the lake. Or it's like the barbecue,
Right.
or like some combination of the two. So
I'm very happy with the barbecue culture that we found.
I'm very happy with it too, but we could also have a little opera. So I think that it is a lack of kind of knowing each other, but I do think that there's almost like a culture of patronage that maybe we could grow and nurture a little bit more. Like, I think if Austin, which is very much bubbling up, I think now, and has been for some time, but is now picking up steam.
Which is crazy given how, I agree with you, and how fast we've been moving, and it does feel like we're accelerating, like, wow.
Oh, yeah. And so I think there's this like layer, again, not replacing anything, but almost like on top of the beauty of the city, of the high arts, of culture, of fashion, of architecture, of all these different things, that is growing in a very Austin way, but is becoming more important. And maybe as that becomes more and more defined and exciting, maybe the people who could potentially, you know, be patrons or supporters of that will be more excited to be a part of that. But right now, some of those verticals of culture, which I always show up to and love very much, it's almost like I wish it was more prominent in people's minds when they think about Austin.
Yeah, no, I think that's not. It's funny because a lot of like the shows and things that we go to are all like the traveling ones.
Yes.
You know, like such and such big thing. Oh, we should go see that person or this person or whatever who's here for that.
Yeah.
But it tends to be a lot less. We've gone out to comedy shows that like of local people, but I think that's probably the only thing that it kind of tapped into, and partially because of just like back to our story, like the platforms, like not hearing about it kind of in our own, like perfectly that it's a bubble. Also, having kids makes, you know, you take when you can, you know.
Yes, that's true. That's totally true. As I've discovered recently. But yeah, I think as it becomes kind of more defined and prominent, I think it will just be more exciting to be a part of, hopefully. More exciting to more people, because I'm already very excited about it, as you can tell. But I don't know. I think that's a really exciting next chapter for Austin.
So what is like the creative infrastructure that that we need that's, you know... Okay, so we got about 2 more out. No,
Well, oh
right,
my
here we
gosh,
go.
I was going to say, how much time do you have? I'll give you an example of some people that I think are doing an amazing job that are just inspiring in terms of infrastructure. So there's a new magazine shop called Tomo Mags downtown. Have you been here? Okay, you need to just leave right now and go see it. There's a new shop. It's run by a friend called Vico. His name is Vico Puentes, who owns this. And it's called Tomo Mags. And I can't believe this didn't exist in Austin before. It's this like beautiful magazine shop with publications from around the world and a coffee shop. And there's something about that environment of like inspiration and inquiry and an appreciation of fashion and high design and high, you know, all of these things that I can't tell you how many people, like I said, I have a lot of coffees with people. And they just say, oh, let's meet at Tomo. Because it's become this place. And then I go with my friend Jet, and we founder of Foda, an amazing creative studio here in Austin, and we were having coffee there. And then Vico came to sit with us, and then he and Jet met. And so some of the, just an example of surgical infrastructure, which by the way is downtown. So he's doing good work for the walkability of downtown.
Right.
But just an example of those like independent, really creative, beautiful spaces that allow people to maybe have conversation or run into each other and help this to flourish a little more. Of course, I think publication is a big part of it. But for example, one thing we introduced last year was a class of rising stars in Austin. We have very talented people here, but a lot of talented young people leave. You know, they go to the UT School of Architecture and they go to New York or LA or
This is a problem that I think across the board. I mean, we were just talking about, so in the startup space, Austin is amazing for families. We are not either necessarily and this is a broad brush, but the 25-year-old founder, operator, engineer, like that, we don't have as much. You said either they go to UT and they leave.
Yeah.
We have some, but not nearly the scale that we need. I think the number that we were again, this was specific in like, you know, engineering talent for a particular thing, was like San Francisco to New York, 10 to 1 in terms of volume. Austin and New York is 10 to 1. So like, so a hundredth the size of SF, a tenth the size of New York. And when we have the kind of growth that we're wanting to happen, that's numbers that don't work.
Right. That's a very good point. I would be curious to know what the numbers are for the architecture industry in Austin. But it's just a well-known qualitative fact, I would say, that a lot of young people leave to go to these bigger cities. And some of them come back.
I feel like the cultural side, and I'll use that really broadly, like the things, can be part of the connective and attractive tissue. Like that's some of the things that why you want to stay. You're like, it's a cool place. I mean, like people go to New York without knowing, like they go to SF because like, I'm going to go build and make, people go to New York, again, painting a broad brush because it's New York and it's cool.
And they have an idea of New York and what it used to be, I think,
right.
As opposed to, for sure.
Yeah, there's plenty of issues in New York, but.
Well, to your point, I think that the people who choose to, the young people who choose to stay here is like, I want to be their friend. Because I think they see what is happening here and that it's not a Manhattan or something that's kind of at a, completely different point in its cultural life. It's actually, beyond being an incredible place to live, there's amazing opportunity here. Mm-hmm. It's like a sandbox city kind of moment where people want to build together. They want to make something. You can also kind of try something and, it doesn't work. Okay, try something else. And they want to work together to do it. So the people who, young people or otherwise, that want to stay here and build here and contribute to the culture here, it's not just build for building's sake, but contribute something meaningful, that's someone I want to be friends with because
I think that the meaningful thing, I think, has really stretched across Austin recently, both on the cultural sense, but like if you look at the major tech companies and the startups in the last 5 years that have gone on, it's all the mission driven moonshot. It's like, I'm not going to create the B2B SaaS. I'm going to solve, energy. I'm going to solve, health. I'm going to solve, the defense of our nation. Like all of these kinds of things. That's the stuff that's kind of coming out versus nothing wrong with B2B SaaS, but right. But that's, it is that kind of almost like frontier where we're on the horizon, we're going to go build something meaningful.
Yeah.
And I think that also has kind of been, that's an Austin thing. I think that's going through.
Well, I'm very happy to hear you say that. I've certainly seen that in my corner of the, of the city for sure. And so, to that, one small, humble gesture, I would say that we've tried to do through the magazine is we introduced this class of rising stars that we're about to do the photo shoot for the second year of just highlighting the young people that are doing amazing things in the industry. Not a novel idea, obviously, but here it kind of is in a way. The university, of course, celebrates young talent, but then it goes from there, and then there's this big gap, and then it's the people who have been doing it for 15 years that are in the magazines and stuff.
Right.
And so even, like I said, small gesture, but something to kind of celebrate and recognize, you may just be an intern, but you did this really amazing thesis, and you have these really great ideas, and we want you here. We want you to stay here. We want to support you. We want to help you build here. That's really important, I think. So it's the, physical spaces like Vico's Tomo Mags, it's the recognition, which in my world is through publication, but it's also, through your platform, your podcast, other podcasts around the city, and just media outlets. So it's the recognition of people who are culturally contributing is really important.
It's interesting, the parallels between, we talk about these things aren't converging the way they should, but it's literally the same issues they're all facing, right? They're both dealing with fragmentation. They're both dealing with the fact that the 20-something-year-old is not who we're attracting as well. Right. And so it's all these kind of same things. And then obviously one attracts the other. I said when you build out that narrative, whether it is the cultural narrative, whether it's the tech narrative. I mean, one of the things I always found really interesting was the CPG space here. Austin is always a part of their identity. And so they literally become cultural ambassadors. When I'm drinking Tito's, I know it's from Austin, right?
Yeah.
Having Poppy and things like that. And so you have all these amazing, the CPG space is another one that's, I think, kind of on its own island. And then, like, in the last, call it, year and a half, the two biggest exits were Siete and Poppy, right? So you're like, it's a pretty important pillar in this. But again, it's over here, and the traditional tech is over here, and and the music scene and all this is over here. And it's like, how do we kind of shove people together? Well, I think there's also the understanding that the city is more than downtown. I think that's there's a lot that's that focus. And I think it really has become, partially because of the nature of what we're all building. Yeah. Like, you can't build a rocket ship downtown. Like, I mean, you could, but like, I don't really recommend it.
Yeah, probably not yet.
Right. Yeah, that's a whole level of modular and small if we can build the rockets downtown. Exactly. But like, so the point is, it goes from Bastrop to, Cedar Park and Georgetown all the way to like, San Marcos. And so some of those things, and this is where I think almost the cultural element has to play this role, ends up being the thread between. Yeah. And you're like, okay, so I do want to go, we will, like, well, I say it's not all downtown, there's specialness of like, there's only things that downtown can do.
For sure.
Right. You're going to have that scale. When you have some of those tourings we're talking about are coming, they're like, yeah, like the HEB Center up in like Round Rock, like, it's nice and fine, but like Moody's is going to track a different talent level. And you're like, I'm going to get to go see, I don't see much, ABCD, whatever, but like, we'll go see those shows. Or like, we saw Cirque there or something. Yeah. And so, yeah. So like, that's going to be the connective. But back to the point, like, we went to the Cirque show and then we went home.
Right. Well, I think what you just described, there's a parallel in both of our industries that we're talking about of being attracted to come to Moody's, for example, because it has that's what I think about a lot in terms of the design industry, in my, like I said, corner of the city and the industry. What can we do to not just make the Austin design ecosystem thrive and help young people stay here and be excited to stay here and have jobs and get people to work with each other, but also, I don't need to tell you this, Austin is in such a different place on the national stage right now that it's also about, okay, how do we have the local ecosystem thrive, but then also, tell the story on a national stage of what's happening here that can attract other talent, that can maybe bring the kind of people here that we want to be here and the people that we want to stay here, to help them stay and to get them more work and to get more attention. It's a total flywheel situation, and certainly in like the separate verticals, but it's an interesting thought of how can there be more intertwining of these, because just float all boats. I call
it creative collisions, right? Like, it's when these again, thinking about a lot in tech, it's like, if the robot guy and the bio guy and the quantum guy, really cool stuff happens. But you're like, I think of Joe Gebbia, who's here, but like I didn't realize. I remember I listened to him on Tim Ferriss a number of years ago, which was a really fascinating interview. And they spent like 3/4 of the interview on his time at the Rhode Island School of Design. And just all the way he thought, and you're like, yeah, you had like, so when you had him and Brian Chesky, I forget the third founder's name, but like they created a really weird thing in the Airbnb together because it's a dynamic set of people, and you have interesting things happen when you're like, I sprinkle a little of this, I sprinkle a little of that, and have that kind of different thought patterns. And we need design and innovation. We need, it still hurts me. I know there's something going on at Blatton right now, but there's the Data Land, the museum in LA, and it's like all AI visual art. And I'm like, and they have a kind of a temporary one of that here, but like, we should have won that. Like, this idea of like art and tech coming together, like, why are we not the capital of the world of that?
Well, the question in my mind goes back to, how do we tell that story to the rest of the world? Like, why are we not telling that story right now? What's stopping us?
I think it's not the story. I think it's this, they're not together.
Maybe that's it.
So like, I went to one like, AI art show down. And again, not to say that like it only should be those kinds of things, but the point is like, they're unique. But it was
such an obvious match.
Yeah.
Like, how is that not here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So we could obviously keep going for a long time as we have before, but I always want to end with the same question. So like, what's kind of next on your radar in terms of the next trend, the next experiment that's going to really drive the critical hinge point going forward?
Ooh. I think, to me, what would take Austin to the next level in terms of the recognition it deserves in design and architecture, construction, is some kind of, I would say, bottom up infrastructure. Like we're saying, so not top down, like that conversation we had of this is the designated this or that, but to see, okay, what is a week in Austin that organically has, maybe the AA Homes Tour, which is having its 40th year this year, or some of these things that we can designate the design week. And then people can come from far and wide to appreciate the city, to meet the architects, to tell the story of what's already here. Okay, what's the cluster around the city where there's this showroom and there's this shop and there's this architect and these 5 interior designers? What if this is the, East Side design corridor and that attracts? So it's almost like taking a broader view of the incredible kind of bubbling of talent and work and effort and growth that's already here, and just telling the story in a more cohesive way that just allows it to continue to thrive.
I like it. Organic, storytellers, everything.
Right. Everything.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you for having me.